Hello, boys and girls. We are at 7:30 a.m., and that means it's another time for a round of coffee and bullshit with Duncan King. I am Duncan King, and you are not watching. All zero of my users around YouTube are now lined up at 7:30 in the morning to join me for coffee and bullshit. And boy, the internet world is just hanging on to every word I am saying. All zero of my viewers, all zero of my listeners. But today we're going to go back to anyway, regardless of whether anyone's listening or not. We're going to back to carm.org website in this episode, and we're going to deal with some of the claims in the book of Genesis, some of the problems of the book of Genesis that the carm.org website or Max Slick's website did not mention. As I mentioned earlier in the previous video, there are many issues that he addresses that I felt were kind of softball. They seem to be pretty easy issues for a Christian apologist. It kind of seemed like lobs, and if we're using the tennis court analogy, they're kind of lob serves that he could kind of easily just kind of swat away. So we're going to deal with some issues in the book of Genesis that he did not address, and this is not a comprehensive list. This is it's a good list, but it's not comprehensive. So I'm not going to be bringing up every single problem of the book of Genesis, every single really good problem, but just a few good problems. And the first thing that we obviously deal with would be obviously the Genesis account itself, which he never seemed to even deal with. So we're going to go to Genesis 1. We're going to look at the Genesis account. The scientifically impossible Genesis account. And join in with me, boys and girls. Did I do that correctly? Yes, I did. Okay. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. This is that passage. I don't know if this is really related to debunking the words of the Bible, but this word "spirit" is actually mistranslated here. In the Bible, "spirit" is the word for spirit and the word for wind are exactly the same word. So as a child, that passage always confused me because I'm like, why? Okay, what is God doing here? He's just kind of like, hovering over the waters like some kind of like paraglider or something like that. Is it just some kind of cool thing he liked to do all the time before he started creating things? This actually means wind, the wind of gods, the winds of God. Were just kind of floating around because there were no trees or anything else to stop the wind or to hold back the winds. And let's go into some of these issues. Let there be light. There was light. God saw the light that was good. So light from darkness. God the light day, and the darkness called night. Now here's the issue. How could there be day and night? He had not made the sun yet. He makes the sun quite a bit later. There was evening and there was morning the first day. Obviously, these people now. Can you reconcile this that he called the light day and called the darkness night with the fact that he had not made the sun yet? Okay, well, if we're going to consider magic part of our equation, yes, you can kind of just say he magically made there be light even though there wasn't light and made darkness even though there wasn't a sun yet. But the issue you have there is what we're trying to bring to light here is the fact that does this reflect the way a caveman would consider the world working? And if it reflects kind of a caveman or ancient people's concept of the cosmos, then it is consistent with the idea that a human being made this up. And it's pretty consistent with that. So he made the vault to separate the water under the vault from the water above it. And this is what is called the firmament, meaning there is a dome of water above the earth. And that was still believed. Matt Slick and carm.org implied that that was just a thing that existed prior to the flood. It is mentioned also after the flood. This is what they think makes it rain. There's little holes put in the waters of the sky, and that makes it rain. Of course, this is absolutely ridiculous. It's not even physically possible. And Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land bear fruit with seed in it. This is under the third day. So here he makes vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees in the land bear fruit with seed in it, and other various kinds, and it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds, and God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the third day. Uh-oh. How does he do that when there is no sun yet? Here's where he makes the sun. The sun is made. The sun is made on the fourth day. And here he is putting plants in the ground on the third day. Now, another issue you'll have with people saying with old Earth creationists who want to say, well, each of these days was like a million years. You cannot have plants for a million years without a sun. And to even have them exist for a day without a sun would be impossible because it would be too darn cold. You could not have water either. You cannot have liquid water without a sun. And that sun comes on the fourth day. So none of this is possible. And you can say, well, God's magical. You could just make it possible. But then you have to, but that's not the issue here. The issue is does this suggest that an ancient person with an ancient person's understanding of the cosmos wrote this? And it does suggest it. This view of the universe is consistent with a caveman's view. He also made the stars. So he made basically the entire galaxy except for Earth on this day. And it sort of treats it here as though it's just a little thing, making the stars. It's as small of a thing as separating waters and putting vegetation on one planet as making the entire rest of the universe, which is made on the fourth day. Does that consistent with a caveman's view of the universe? It is absolutely consistent with that. So let the water teem with living creatures and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems, and that moves about in it according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And that was evening, and that was morning, the fifth day. And let land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. God said, let us make mankind in our image and our likeness, so they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground. So God made mankind in his image, and in the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over the living creature that moves on the ground. God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They'll be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures moving on the ground, everything else that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food, and it was so. So here you have another issue here. He's saying he gave it only plants for creatures to eat. So basically, and some creationists will disagree on this. Will say, okay, well, he still made carnivorous animals. He didn't specify that they did not eat anything carnivorous. But I do believe Matt Slick is of the opinion that every single living thing on Earth at that point was carnivorous, and they only became meat eaters after the fall, after man sinned. And that brought sin into the earth, and so it brought things like suffering and animals eating other animals. So basically, but when we explore that in a biological sense, it would mean that boa constrictors squeeze trees to death, which is pretty ridiculous. I don't know what the hell a praying mantis did. I don't know what a leech ate. If leeches sucked trees or plants, it really creates some really stupid situations. The boa constrictor one's my favorite. I don't know what the hell boa constrictors ate. What's another one I like to bring up? Boa constrictors. Scorpions. I guess scorpions stung plants too. They went out there and stung the plant, and then you got to subdue those plants. Those plants can be pretty fast. So anyway, next to the next thing. So we kind of dealt with the book of the creation account there. Another issue we have is Genesis 4:17 through 22. And let's go to that. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant. She gave birth to Enoch. Then Cain was then building a city. He named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad. Irad was the father of Mehuel. Mehuel was the father of Methuselah, and Methuselah was the father of Lamech. Lamech married two women, one named Ada, another named Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal, who was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal, who was the father of all who play stringed instruments and pipes. Jillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Okay, this is not true. There was not a guy at this period of time who was the inventor of forging tools out of bronze and iron. We know this from basically all archaeological evidence suggests this. There was a bronze era and an iron era, and they were not even that distinct. Some of the bronze era kind of looped into the iron era, but they certainly did not both occur at the same moment. Casting iron is actually a much more extensive process than casting bronze. So societies for a very long time were only casting bronze and came to cast iron things later. There wasn't just one guy who invented that. And they were doing it long before this period of time that the Bible suggests. I think the Bible's saying that this happened about, I think we're saying that it's claiming it's about 4,000 BCE. We have a lot of bronze things before then. Let's look at some early bronze artifacts. Bronze artifacts. Most precious bronze artifacts. So let's go to Bronze Age is a historical period characterized by these of bronze, proto-writing, and other early features of urban civilization. The Bronze Age, second principal period. Okay, this is well before this Canaan guy supposedly lived, 3 to 300. In East Asia, it occurred quite later, but in the Near East and all these other places, yeah, they were casting bronze before this dude lived. The Canaanites were not descended from a man named Canaan. Okay, this is Genesis 9, 20 through 29. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of his wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. When they walked in backward and covered their father's, naked body, their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves. Will he be to his brothers?" He also said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be a slave to Shem. May God extend
Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave of Japheth.
All right, the issue here is that what it's implying here, and a lot of ancient Old Testament historians believe that the entire narrative and all the mentions of Canaan and the entire patriarch narrative of the patriarchs is to basically lay some kind of historical basis for them being freaking assholes to the Canaanites and treating them like shit and killing their kids and all the stuff that they did about the time that the Torah was written, or the early parts of when the Torah was written. So Canaan, in any way, what they're saying here, what they're trying to say is that Canaan basically is a bunch of Noah gawkers. That's what they had it coming. Issue is Canaan was not named after a guy named Canaan, and we know this. Canaan, the Canaanites were descended from a named Canaan. The name Canaan means land of purple, and it was given to the region because of the coastal cities made and exported purple dye. It was common myth in tool making to turn the name of a nation to the name of man instead of be its ancestor. So the name, the Canaan was not named after a guy named Canaan. That's total bullshit. Let's go into the flood account. We'll go back to me again because I am really adorable. Actually, I'm not. But so go into the flood account. There are so many things people bring up about the flood account. You could go on to it like all day how ridiculous the flood story is. But I'm just going to talk about some of the things I like to bring up, some problems that I find funny, a little more ridiculous than other ones. And again, it's a situation where an apologist can just say, well, it was all magical, so he could have made it all work. But then you're like, well, okay, why didn't you just give everybody magical heart attacks? So one problem is, okay, obviously archaeological evidence shows that most societies existed prior to the flood, and they continue to exist afterwards. There's no archaeological evidence that any society completely stopped existing at one point and then picked up like later when people came back from Mount Ararat or wherever the ark landed, and they just came repopulated it later. That's not a situation in archaeological evidence. Societies like Egypt and societies like in China and places like that, they just continued. There was no stoppage at any point in time. Another thing I like to bring up is that the flood would have drowned all the trees. And this reflects also a basic poor understanding of ancient people of biology, because they obviously didn't think that trees needed to live above water to survive, and they actually do. Trees needed a pocket of air inside them to continue to live. And their seeds also cannot be drowned. So the flood also would have wiped out every single green thing that lived. At some point, the dove sends off and returns with olive leaf. Problem with right there is the dove, there had only been dry land in that story for 7 days. It wouldn't have been even enough time, assuming that any of the seeds had survived to germinate and for a plant, for a leaf to grow on something, for that dove to go find the leaf. Basically, every single green thing on Earth would have died. They didn't take any plants on the ark. Problem I liked, another one I like is the altitude. The ark, supposedly the flood, covered the highest mountain in the entire world. And if you know anything about rock climbers or rock climbing, you don't have much air up there. It's hard to breathe when you get that high. They have to use masks and things like that in order to breathe, because there's not enough air pressure above your head. See, when you inhale, you're actually relaxing your chest muscles. You're not doing anything really. When you exhale, you're using muscles, but when you inhale, you're just relaxing them and letting the air come in. You can't actually inhale fast. All you're doing when you're inhaling is you're relaxing them, and they just fill up. And they just fill up because of the air pressure. You have air pressure from all the air above your head is pressure in this exact altitude. There's a certain amount of pressure here, which allows you to inhale and exhale. And when you're up too high, there's not enough pressure for you to be able to inhale easily. This is also why pilots and planes that go up high, they have, heads, things on their face to kind of mouthpieces to help them breathe, because there just isn't enough air pressure up there for you to inhale easily. And if a flood, if it arc up that's above the highest mountain, everything on it would have died. They wouldn't have been able to breathe. Noah did not have, from my understanding, God did not grant him an oxygen tank. Issues with a wooden boat. This was brought up by Bill Nye made this point very well in his debate with Ken Ham. The largest wood boat, the Bible specifies how big the ark would have been. It says so many cubits, yada yada. We know that wooden boats made that big are unstable. When they're in the ocean, the tides and the rocking and reeling twist the wood, and they become inhospitable places for wood. Well, I don't know. I hear some kind of noise there. So they rock and reel, and the largest boats we ever made had to have pumps to pump the water out, because they would constantly be filling with water while the wood twisted. And when you have a big wooden boat like that, it just doesn't work out. Viruses, another thing I like to bring up with the flood. Where were the viruses on the ark? I mean, the viruses would have all been drowned too, unless they were on the ark. So what happened to syphilis? What animals had gonorrhea? What animals had rabies? What animals on the ark had smallpox? They all would have had to have had them, or they would not be here. Unless you're trying to claim that those things evolved later, which is evolution. I mean, either you're going to say evolution exists, or you're going to say that the animals on the ark had smallpox and had rabies and had every other horrible communicable disease that exists. Otherwise, those diseases would have drowned it out in the flood, and we wouldn't have them now. The other issue is the animal dispersal. Everybody brings this up. How the heck did penguins go from the Middle East and waddle up to wherever they ended up in the Arctic or whatever? How did kangaroos all come from the Middle East over to Australia? How did the New World monkeys make it across the ocean to get to South America? At this point in time, the continents were already spread out to where they are as far as tectonic plate activity goes. And you can't even explain them being any closer by this flood narrative, because according to the biblical people, this is the last time continents would have moved even. I mean, water can't move continents anyway. But you hear some Christians say that, well, the flood actually moved the continents, and they were once all together, and then it moved them. Well, okay, after the flood's over with, they're not together anymore. So how are the New World monkeys going to make it over to South America? And how are they going to get around? It's just one of those impossible things. I can go on into that for quite a long time. But I don't want to sit here and babble about the flood for a long time, because I have other things to get into. But those are some of the ones some of the issues I like to bring up the most. They make me chuckle the most when people bring up the flood. The altitudes one, the wooden boat issue, the viruses, and the drowning of all the plants. And again, Christians could say, well, God made it work because of magic. Well, if he's just going to use magic, why don't you just give everybody magical heart attacks? I don't really get it. Another issue is that Abraham, see, in the Old Testament, it seems like the story of the patriarchs, and a lot of Old Testament historians agree with me on this. In fact, it's standard. I mean, in textbooks, they'll say this. The entire purpose of the narratives are to justify a lot of political relationships that Israelites had at the time they were written, which is actually more in the 1st century, with their neighbors, the political relationships they had with them, the wars they're having with their political neighbors. Justify those relationships by telling stories in these patriarch narratives that make up false histories of where their people come from. And one thing is the Israelites' relationship with Mesopotamians. So what it goes into a long diatribe in all the patriarch stories, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to make the case that Israelites are actually not related to Canaanites. They're actually from Mesopotamia or northern Mesopotamia, which would be the area of sort of western Turkey and over Syria, a little bit over that area. And you see a lot of references of that in the Bible. Let me show you where it tries to claim this. Let's go to Genesis 11:31. Genesis 11:1. Oops. Okay. Get off my screen. All right. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, Lot's son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram. There they set out from Ur of the Chaldees to go to Canaan. When they came to Haran, they settled there. This is what it's claiming here, is that this is actually where Abram came from, Ur of the Chaldees. And then Genesis 24 talks about where now Abram was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to his senior servant in the household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh." This actually means grab my junk. A lot of people think that's what that means. Your hand under my thigh. It's they swear by grabbing each other's junk. But anyway, it's kind of funny. The whole wholesome Bible, swearing to each other by grabbing each other's testicles. I want you to swear by the Lord, by the God of heaven and earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughter of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. So he's saying Isaac did not marry a Canaanite woman. So, and then it goes ahead and say, that's where he found Rebecca. And he found his other wives there. And let me show you where they all came from. Travels of Abraham. That's one version that they kind of came from Iraq region. That's actually where they're all from. That's Haran. That's where he went and found his wife. That's Ur, where Abraham found his wife. And they did the same thing with Jacob. So Isaac went here to get a wife. Jacob went back here to get a wife. So multiple generations of Abram's descendants are going back to this area to get wives so that they won't marry Canaanites. Now, what's my point? My point here is that if this were true, then Jews would be more related to Mesopotamians than they would be to Canaanites. That's the point. That's the entire thing they're saying here. Jews are from Western Iraq or lower Iran or Syria kind of region there. And they're not from the place where they actually end up being, which would be around the Canaanites and that kind of region. We know from DNA that that is false. Israelites are of the same bloodline as the local Canaanites were. And they're also very closely related to the Palestinians because the Palestinians moved in there and they also mated with locals in that region when they ended up taking that region over. So their Israelites and Jews are directly descendant from the people that have always lived in that area. They're not related to Mesopotamians, as the Bible says. So that is absolutely nonsense. We know from DNA that it is false. Now let's get to the issues of the camels. The issue of the camels. That's my screen. Camels were actually domesticated in the 10th century. Here's an article that mentions this. It comes from archaeological evidence. Finding Israel's first camels, archaeologists pinpoint the date when domestic camels arrived in Israel. Using radiocarbon dating, archaeologists can pinpoint the moment when domesticated camels arrived in the southern Levant. Their findings further emphasize the disagreements between biblical texts and verifiable history and define a turning point in Israel's engagement with the rest of the world. Camels are mentioned in pack animals in biblical stories of Abraham, Joseph, and Jacob. But archaeologists have shown that camels were not domesticated in the land of Israel until centuries after the age of the patriarchs. Let me see here. Archaeologists have established that camels are probably domesticated in the Arab Peninsula for use as pack animals somewhere toward the end of the second millennium BCE. So this is around 1000 something BCE. In the southern Levant, where Israel are located, the oldest known domesticated camel bones are from the Arava Valley, which runs along the Israeli-Jordanian border from the Dead Sea to the Red Sea. It was the ancient center of copper production. At a 2009 dig, Dr. Ben Joseph dated the Arava Valley copper smelting camp where the domesticated camel bones were found to 11th to 9th century BCE. In 2013, he led another dig in the area. And whenever they dig and they find any later sites, any sites that are dated to any later period, they don't have any camel bones. They did not have domesticated camels in that region until about that time. And they think that they were used to mine copper. But that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says in Genesis 31:17, let's go to that. The Bible says in Genesis 31:17, and Jacob put his children and his wives on camels. And what time period did he do this? Bible timeline. This isn't my timeline. This is your timeline, Christians. Well, you can base this on things in the Bible. So Jacob lives at Isaac born. Scroll down. Come on. Let me move. All right. Abram had camels. 2085 BC. Isaac born 2066 BCE. Birth of Jacob 2006. And camels came about in that region around this era here. Birth of Samuel. All the people in these stories that supposedly had camels were way dead by the time they actually domesticated camels in this region. 32:7. Genesis 32:7. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. 37:25. They sat down to eat their meal and looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they're on their way to take them down to Egypt. This is impossible, sir. This narrative is impossible. In Genesis 14:14, let's take a look at this issue. Another fun issue. Probably one of the worst contradictions in the entire Bible. And it deals with the book of Genesis. And Slick doesn't even mention it in his entire analysis of Genesis. His entire dealing with supposed biblical problems. Genesis 14:14. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. This is the town that he went to. He went to this town in, let's see here where he went there. Went to that town around this period here. Abram took a trip to the town of Dan, pursuing people. Judges 18:29. Way later in the Bible. They named it Dan, after their ancestor Dan, who was born in Israel, though he used to be called Laish. So they named this town Dan way after he was supposedly there, around this period. So Abraham went to a town that, according to the Bible itself, didn't exist yet. It was named after this Dan dude. Way later. One of the biggest contradictions in the whole Bible. Another issue is Beersheba, and I won't go into the passages right now. It was named by Abram, and then Isaac later named it too. They had two instances in two different parts of the patriarch narrative where the same town was named by two different guys in two different stories. Bethel's the same thing. Jacob named it Bethel in totally different circumstances. He named this town twice. So I guess there was some kind of story that he named the town, but different writers, when putting these kind of stories together, put it in a different instance. He names it there for a totally different reason each time too. Genesis 30:37 through 39. You want to learn something about genetics? Let's learn about some genetics here. Jacob, however, took fresh-cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and made white strips on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches on all of the watering troughs so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they mated in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked, speckled, and spotted. So by eating, what it's saying here is that Jacob made when he put these in front of his flocks. I forget what he had, if he had goats or sheep or whatever he had. But he put them in front of peeled branches. And that made their babies they have streaked and spotted. That is stupid. Let's go to a little passage here in the Skeptic's Annotated Bible, which is a decent website. It's not the greatest website for biblical problems. It does miss a lot of things, and it kind of makes a big deal out of things that aren't really a big deal. Did Abraham know God's name? And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. And I appeared, and this is in Exodus. He's talking to Moses. God says to him, I appeared to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob by the name of God Almighty, but my name, Jehovah, was not known to them. But by my name, Jehovah, was I not known to them. Abraham knows the name here. So that's one of those other bigger contradictions. And it's one of those ones Matt can explain away. He'd come up with something. He'd come up with some kind of secret admirer's fallacy to deal with it, but it'd be really desperate, whatever he came up with. Another contradiction here. And I'm bringing up more serious contradictions. The one Matt Slick was dealing with on his list of contradictions were really weak things. Why did I accidentally click? Here are 4 lists of Benjamin's sons in the Bible. None of them agree. So we have different lists of the sons here. And the sons of Benjamin were Bela, Becher, Beshel, blah, 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 blah. And then we got a list here in Numbers. And then we got a list here in First Chronicles. And here's the lists next to each other. Totally different lists of his sons. Bela is common to all of them. Becher's common to 2 of them. Ishbael's common to 2 of them, but a different 2. Well, there are actually 3 of them, but not in this one. And then we got sons that aren't in any of the other ones. So he's got totally different kids in each of these lists. One of those kind of irreconcilable contradictions. Where was Joseph buried? Another irreconcilable contradiction. Of course, Jews have no issue here because they don't believe in the New Testament, which makes it a little easier on them. You get less books to contradict each other. So that's comfortable being a Jew when it comes to the Bible, but not so comfortable being a Christian, at least in this instance. They carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in a cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which Abraham had brought along with the field as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite. This is what they did with Jacob at the ends. This is at the very end of Genesis. After Jacob died in Egypt, they carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in a cave. In this particular cave. Then the book of Acts says they did not do that. Then Jacob went out of Egypt, where he and our ancestor died. Their bodies were brought back to Shechem and placed in a tomb that Abraham had bought for his sons of Hamor at Shechem for a certain amount of money. This town, Shechem, and the one I just mentioned, Machpelah, were about 50 miles apart. They're totally different towns. And that is all for now. Oh, what else do I have? Nope, that's it. One other thing I was going to say is about the whole thing about people not recognizing each other as a plot element that happens a lot in the Hebrew and the patriarch stories. And cam's off. All right. Well, that's all for today, and a little sloppy this time, but I'm not reading as much as I'm talking, so that's a little bit of an issue there. And hopefully you join me tomorrow for more talk, coffee, and bullshit, where we go over morecarm.org, and namely this section on Exodus. We will begin tomorrow and go over a lot of his apologetics there. And then probably at the end of Exodus, I'll probably also have to do this again. I'll probably have to talk about some problems with Exodus that he didn't mention. And I'm glad you joined me, whoever you are, probably joining me way after this is broadcasting, because currently no one's watching this. So, but we will set the internet on storm. We will set the internet on fire with these broadcasts. And I am tearing it apart with my 0 viewers watching this. And, you know, no, the internet will not survive. Christianity will not survive this show. You know, all 0 of my viewers are deconverting as we speak. So you're watching history right here. Don't miss it. Every morning at about 7:30, I'll try to be on the air. And I'm glad you joined me, whoever you are, probably watching this way after I'm actually airing it. But I'm glad you did eventually join me and watch this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of this, whatever this is. And thanks for watching. Now I got to click off. You're going to watch me click off because of the way I have to turn here. So I can't really say, and let's try this again. And thanks for joining me for the show, and thanks for watching.